You are somewhere alone, maybe in the kitchen, maybe driving, maybe just walking from one room to another, and you hear yourself say something out loud. Maybe it is your own name. Maybe it is a little instruction like, okay, just do this first. Maybe it is a whole running commentary on what you are making for dinner, or a quiet rehearsal of a conversation that has not happened yet, or a gentle scolding after you have done something clumsy. And for just a half second you notice it, this habit of talking to yourself, and something in you wonders if that is entirely normal. Most people do it, and most people at some point feel a little odd about it. That is the thing this episode is really about. Not just the habit itself, but what it actually means, what it is doing for you, why some people do it more than others, and why the small embarrassment around it is almost entirely undeserved. Talking to yourself is not a quirk to be explained away. It is one of the more interesting things a human mind does, and understanding it a little better might change how you hear that quiet inner voice the next time it decides to speak up out loud. Let us start with what is actually happening when you do it. Your brain is doing something quite remarkable all the time. It is running a kind of internal commentary, a near constant stream of thoughts, impressions, reactions, and plans. Psychologists sometimes call this inner speech, and for most people it is almost continuous. You are always, in some sense, talking to yourself. The version that happens out loud is simply that process stepping outside its usual boundaries. The inner becomes outer. Researchers who study language and cognition have found that this kind of self-directed speech, whether silent or spoken aloud, serves real functions. It is not random noise. It is the mind using language as a tool for thinking, organizing, and regulating itself. The same basic mental machinery that lets you talk to another person also lets you talk to yourself, and your brain uses it deliberately. One of the clearest functions is regulation. When you say something out loud to yourself, you are not just expressing a thought, you are shaping it. There is something about hearing your own voice that makes an idea feel more concrete, more real, more manageable. If you have ever talked yourself through a difficult task step by step, or said something like, "It is going to be fine," when you were anxious, you were using language to regulate your own emotional state. That is not weakness, that is a very human form of self-support. Children do this openly and without shame. If you have ever watched a young child play alone, you may have noticed they narrate everything. They announce what their toys are doing. They explain their decisions to no one in particular. They think out loud as naturally as breathing. The psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who spent a great deal of time thinking about how language and thought develop together, described this as private speech. He believed children were using external language to guide themselves through problems and tasks, essentially borrowing the structure of conversation to organize their own minds. And his observation was that over time, most of this speech goes inward. It becomes the silent inner voice, but it never disappears entirely. Under pressure, under complexity, under strong emotion, it tends to come back out. So when you catch yourself talking aloud to yourself as an adult, you are not doing something childish. You are doing something children do openly and efficiently, and that many adults do privately and sometimes apologetically. The apology is the part worth questioning. Here is how it tends to show up in everyday life, and you will probably recognize at least some of these. There is the task management version. You are looking for your keys and you say out loud, "Okay, where did you last have them?" You are not confused about who you are speaking to. You are using the shape of a question to direct your own attention, because a question, even asked to yourself, creates a kind of cognitive pull toward an answer. It focuses the mind. This works. People who use self-directed speech during problem solving tend to stay more organized and make fewer errors, not because they are unusual, but because language is a powerful organizing tool and they are using it. There is the emotional processing version. Something difficult has happened and you find yourself going over it quietly, maybe in the car, maybe in the shower, saying what you actually feel about it in words. This is the mind trying to make sense of experience. Putting something into language changes how you hold it. It creates a little distance, a little structure. It is related to the same impulse that makes people write in journals or need to talk things through with a friend. Sometimes there is no friend available, and the self becomes the sounding board. There is also the motivating version, the quiet encouragement before something hard. You can do this, or even just, come on. Athletes do it visibly and without embarrassment, and the research on performance suggests it genuinely helps. Instructional self-talk, the kind that breaks a task into steps, tends to improve performance on complex tasks. Motivational self-talk, the kind that is more about encouragement than instruction, tends to help most when effort and confidence are what is needed. These are not the same, and your mind seems to know the difference, reaching for whichever kind fits the moment. And then there is the rehearsal version, the conversation you play out before it happens, the phone call you practice in the bathroom mirror, the thing you will say to your boss or your partner or your mother, spoken quietly to yourself in advance. This is the mind preparing. It is running a simulation using language as the medium, and it does this to reduce uncertainty, to figure out what you actually think and feel, and to arrive at the real conversation a little more ready. None of these are signs of anything wrong. They are signs of a mind actively working. Now, there is a version worth noticing. When self-talk becomes relentless, when the inner narrator is harsh, repetitive, and impossible to quiet, that is a different experience entirely. Most people are familiar with the critical inner voice that rehearses old mistakes or warns constantly of future ones. That kind of self-talk, when it loops and judges and exhausts, is worth paying attention to. Not because it means something is broken, but because the tone of the way you speak to yourself matters. Research in self-compassion, particularly the work associated with psychologist Kristen Neff, suggests that treating yourself with something like the kindness you would offer a friend, even in your private internal speech, tends to support better well-being over time. The content of self-talk is one thing. The quality of it, whether it is warm or punishing, matters too. This is general insight, not a substitute for professional support. And if that inner voice feels particularly heavy or hard to manage, talking to someone trained in this is always a good idea. But for most people, most of the time, talking to yourself is simply a sign that your mind is doing what minds do. It is using every tool available to think, to cope, to prepare, and to understand. The fact that language is one of those tools, and that it sometimes comes out loud, is not embarrassing. It is actually quite elegant. What might be worth doing is simply noticing, the next time you catch yourself mid-sentence in an empty room, what your mind was actually trying to do. Were you organizing something? Working through something emotional? Preparing yourself? Encouraging yourself? because once you know what function the self-talk is serving, you understand something real about what you needed in that moment. And that kind of self-knowledge, quiet and unglamorous as it is, tends to be genuinely useful. The voice that talks to you when no one else is around is not a stranger. It is you thinking. It is you helping yourself along. And it has been doing that your entire life. There is something worth sitting with in the idea that the most constant companion you will ever have is your own inner voice. The one that narrates, questions, soothes, rehearses, and occasionally speaks out loud in a quiet kitchen. Getting to know that voice, noticing its tone, understanding what it reaches for and why, might be one of the more quietly valuable things a person can do. If this felt like something you needed to hear today, consider subscribing to The Quiet Part. There is more here whenever you want it.